Title: Science versus Scripture. Who got the beginning of humanity right? Let me ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. What if everything you were taught about where humans came from is wrong? Not partly wrong. Not misunderstood. Completely, foundationally wrong. Because right now, in 2026, we have two stories about the beginning of humanity sitting on the table. One is written in ancient text, copied by hand for thousands of years, translated, debated, and believed by billions. The other is written in fossils, DNA, and carbon atoms, tested in labs, peer-reviewed, and taught in every major university. And they do not say the same thing. One says a man was formed from dust, and a woman from his rib, placed in a garden, 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. The other says we share a common ancestor with chimpanzees roughly 6 to 7 million years ago, and that anatomically modern humans emerged in Africa around 300,000 years ago, spreading across the globe in waves. Both can't be literally true. So who got it right? That question has started wars, ended friendships, split families at dinner tables, and launched thousands of PhD dissertations. And in the next few minutes, we're going to walk straight into the middle of it. No preaching. No lab coat superiority. Just the evidence, the claims, the conflicts, and the surprising places where these two stories actually shake hands. Because here's the twist nobody tells you, this isn't just science versus scripture. It's story versus story. And humans don't live by data. We live by story. So let's start at the beginning. Both of them. The first version, Scripture's story open the book of Genesis. Doesn't matter which translation. The opening is almost poetic, rhythmic, like it was meant to be memorized and told around fires. Day by day, order emerges from chaos. Light, sky, land, stars, animals. Then, on day 6, the climax, let us make man in our image. Adam, from Adama, Hebrew for ground or dust. God breathes into his nostrils the breath of life. Later, Eve is made from Adam's side, or rib, depending on your translation. They're placed in Eden. One rule. They break it. Consequence enters. Pain, toil, death. Outside the garden, their children start civilization. Cain builds a city. Metals are forged. Music is invented. Generations are listed, father to son, with ages that stretch into centuries. Then a flood resets everything, and from Noah's 3 sons, the nations spread. If you read it plainly, it gives you a timeline. Ussher's chronology in the 17th century added up the genealogies and put creation at 4004 BC. October 23rd, to be exact. He even gave a time, 9 a.m. Other scholars land between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago for Adam. That's the young Earth view. It's not the only scriptural view, but it's the one most people think of when they hear scripture versus science. But stop there and you miss something crucial. Genesis isn't written as a modern history textbook. Ancient Near Eastern texts didn't work that way. They used structure, repetition, and symbolism to convey truth. The Hebrew word for day, yom, can mean a 24-hour period, but it also means an era or age. Psalm 90 says 1,000 years in your sight are like a day. So even within scripture-based interpretations, you have debate. Old Earth creationists read Genesis as describing long epics. Day-age theory. Gap theory. Framework hypothesis. They accept a 4.5 billion-year-old Earth, Big Bang cosmology, and still see Genesis as true, just not literalistic in the modern sense. Then you have theistic evolution, or evolutionary creation. The view that God used evolution as the mechanism. Adam and Eve could be historical individuals chosen from existing humans, or they could be archetypes representing all humanity. The point of Genesis in this reading isn't how material origins happened. It's why. Who we are. Why there's moral law. Why the world is broken. So already, Scripture doesn't have just one answer. It has a range. From Ken Ham to Francis Collins, both reading the same Bible, coming to different conclusions on timeline and mechanism. The second version, Science's story now switch lenses. Forget text. Look at rock. In 1856, in the Neander Valley of Germany, quarry workers found bones. Thick brow ridges. A sloped forehead. This wasn't a modern human. This was Homo neanderthalensis. Darwin had published on the origin of species 3 years later. The collision was inevitable. Fast forward. 1924, South Africa. Raymond Dart unwraps the Tong child, a small skull with a mix of ape and human features. Australopithecus africanus. 3.3 million years old. 1974, Ethiopia. Donald Johanson finds Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis. She walked upright. The fossils stack up. Homo habilis, 2.4 million years old, using stone tools. Homo erectus, 1.9 million years old, with a human-like body, controlling fire, migrating out of Africa. Homo heidelbergensis, then Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, and finally Homo sapiens, s, showing up in Morocco at Jebel Irhoud, 300,000 years ago. But fossils are just bones. DNA tells the deeper story. In 1987, Rebecca Cann and team traced mitochondrial DNA, which you inherit only from your mother, back to one woman who lived in Africa about 200,000 years ago. Mitochondrial Eve. Not the only woman alive, but the one whose maternal lineage never went extinct. Y chromosome studies did the same for Y chromosome Adam, about 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. They didn't know each other. They weren't a couple. The names are nicknames. Then in 2010, Svante Pääbo sequenced the Neanderthal genome. Surprise, non-African humans today carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. We interbred. Same with Denisovans, especially in Melanesian and Tibetan populations. The human story isn't a single line. It's a braided stream. Genetics also lets us test common ancestry. Humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Great apes have 24. Problem? Unless you look at human chromosome 2. It has what looks like 2 fused chromosomes, with telomere sequences in the middle and 2 centromeres. Exactly what you'd expect if 2 ape chromosomes fused. And that's what we see. Endogenous retroviruses are another fingerprint. When a virus infects a cell and inserts its DNA, sometimes it lands in sperm or egg and gets passed down. Humans and chimps share thousands of identical ERVs at identical locations in our genomes. The odds of that happening by chance are astronomical. The simplest explanation, we inherited them from a common ancestor. Radiometric dating backs the timeline. Carbon-14 for organic material up to 50,000 years. Potassium argon for volcanic rock, millions of years. Uranium lead for billions. These methods overlap and cross-check. They don't rely on each other. And they agree, the Earth is 4.54 billion years old. The first Homo sapiens fossils are 300,000 years old. So science's story is gradual, messy, and old. Really old. No garden. No single pair. A population that never dipped below several thousand, according to genetic diversity data. The collision points here's where they clash head-on. 1. Age of humanity, **** scripture read literally, 6000, 10,000 years. Science, 300,000 years for H. sapiens, 6 to 7 million since split from chimp lineage. 2. Method of origin, **** scripture, special creation, dust to Adam, rib to Eve, fully formed. Science, evolution by natural selection, mutation, genetic drift, gene flow. Humans share 98.8% of DNA with chimps. 3.
Population size, **** scripture, starts with 2 people. Science, genetic studies say the human population never went below 10,000 individuals. A single couple would create a genetic bottleneck we don't see. 4. Death before sin ***. Genesis ties death to the fall. Science shows carnivores, cancer, and mass extinctions millions of years before humans existed. T-Rex wasn't vegan. 5. Order of events, ***. Genesis 1, plants before sun, birds before land animals. Genesis 2, man before plants and animals. Science, sun before earth, sea life before land animals before birds. These aren't small footnotes. They're structural. The attempts to reconcile, but people have tried to bridge them. Here are the major attempts. Concordism tries to match Genesis line by line with science. Day-age says each day is an era. The order roughly fits: light, then oceans, then land, then sea life, then land animals, then humans. Problem: the order still breaks down. Fruit trees before sun? Birds before land reptiles? Framework hypothesis says Genesis 1 is a literary structure, not a timeline. Days 1 to 3, realms formed. Days 4 to 6, rulers to fill them. It's theology, not science. That sidesteps conflict by saying Genesis isn't making scientific claims. Evolutionary creation accepts evolution fully but sees God as guiding it. Adam and Eve become symbolic, or they're real people within a larger population that God chose. Biologos, founded by Francis Collins, head of the Human Genome Project, takes this view. They argue Scripture's purpose is to tell us who did it and why, not how. Intelligent design accepts an old Earth and some evolution but argues certain features are too complex to evolve stepwise. It's not directly Genesis-based, but many see it as a middle path. Mainstream science rejects it as not testable. Young Earth creationism rejects mainstream dating methods. They argue radiometric dating assumes constants that may have changed, or that the flood buried fossils rapidly, creating the illusion of age. Organizations like Answers in Genesis hold this view. They point to soft tissue in dinosaur bones, polystrate fossils, and living fossils as challenges. Each model has adherents with PhDs. Each has critics with PhDs. Which means the fight isn't ignorance versus knowledge. It's interpretation versus interpretation. What science can't answer, here's where science taps out. Science explains mechanism. It doesn't do meaning. Ask a biologist how humans evolved, you get mutation and selection. Ask why there's a universe with laws that permit life at all, and you get silence. Or multiverse speculation, which is currently untestable. Science describes what is. It can't tell you what ought to be. Genesis, right or wrong on history, is obsessed with ought. Why is murder wrong? Why do we feel guilt? Why do humans everywhere build altars? And science can't touch the first moment. Big Bang cosmology goes back to 10 to the power of negative 43 seconds. Before that, the equations break. Did time begin? Did something cause it? We don't know is the honest scientific answer. Genesis starts with, in the beginning, God. That's not a scientific claim. It's a metaphysical one. So if you dismiss Scripture because it's not a science textbook, you're judging it by a standard it never claimed to meet. That's like criticizing a love letter for not having footnotes. What Scripture doesn't claim, flip it. Many religious scholars argue Genesis was never meant as a material origin manual. The ancient Hebrews weren't asking 21st century scientific questions. They were surrounded by Babylonian and Egyptian creation myths where humans were made to be slaves of the gods. Genesis subverts that. Humans are made in God's image, given stewardship, dignity, purpose. The genealogies? In ancient cultures, they weren't always exhaustive. The Hebrew word for father can mean ancestor. Begot can skip generations. So Ussher's 4004 BC isn't required by the text. And Jesus himself, when he references Genesis, is making points about marriage and morality, not carbon dating. So the conflict may be less between scripture and science, and more between modern literalism and modern science. Two ways of reading, born in the last 200 years, colliding. The surprising overlaps now for the part nobody expects. They do agree on some weird things. Humanity is special, ***, Genesis, image of God. Science, we are the only species with language, abstract thought, art, music, and cumulative culture. Chimps use tools. We build telescopes. The gap is real, even in evolutionary terms. It's called the cognitive revolution, 70,000 years ago. Out of Africa, ***, Genesis 2 verses 10 to 14 places Eden near the Tigris and Euphrates, but after the flood, humanity spreads from the mountains of Ararat. Science, all H. sapiens mitochondrial lines trace to Africa. We left, in waves, 60,000 to 100,000 years ago, spreading through the Middle East. One blood, ***, Acts 17 verse 26 says God made from one blood every nation of men. Genetics confirms it, we're all incredibly similar. Any two humans share 99.9% of DNA. Race has no biological basis. We're one species, recently spread. The universe had a beginning, ***, 4 centuries, science assumed an eternal universe. Steady-state theory. Then in 1964, Penzias and Wilson found the cosmic microwave background. The Big Bang meant a beginning. Let there be light suddenly sounded less mythic. Even atheist Fred Hoyle, who coined Big Bang as mockery, hated the implication. Life from dust, ***, Genesis, man from dust. Science, every element in your body heavier than hydrogen was forged in a star. You are literally stardust. Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, iron, all supernova products. Dust to dust isn't just poetry. So who got it right, depends what you mean by right. If you want a timeline of material processes, laboratory grade, peer-reviewed, and tested against rocks and genes, science wins. It's not even close. The evidence for an old Earth, common ancestry, and evolution is conciliant, multiple independent lines converging. Fossils, genetics, geology, radiometric dating all tell the same story. If you want purpose, morality, human value, and the reason suffering exists, science has no tools. It can tell you Homo sapiens evolved. It can't tell you why you should care for your neighbor, or why genocide is wrong, or what happens when you die. Genesis speaks to that. The mistake is making them fight in the wrong arena. It's like asking who's better at music, a mathematician or a poet. One gives you structure. The other gives you soul. But let's be honest about the hard part. If you hold to a literal 6-day, 6,000-year view, you have to reject not just biology, but geology, physics, astronomy, and linguistics. You need alternate explanations for starlight, ice cores, lake varves, and genetic markers. Some do. They believe science is misreading the data. If you hold to pure materialism, you have to say consciousness, love, reason, and moral law are all accidents of neurons. No ultimate meaning. They believe scripture is ancient myth. Most people live somewhere in between. They accept the earth is old. They accept evolution happens. But they also think there's something more, that the laws of physics are suspiciously fine-tuned, that the human mind isn't just a computer, that the story of a broken world and promised redemption rings true in a way no journal article can. The real stakes this isn't academic. How you answer this shapes everything. If we're just apes with bigger brains, then morality is a survival tactic. Rights are social constructs. Your life has the meaning you assign it, and none when you're gone. If we're created, then there's a standard outside us. Right and wrong aren't up for vote. Every human, regardless of ability, has inherent worth.
And death isn't the end of the story. That's why this fight is so fierce. It's not about fossils. It's about whether you're an accident or an intention. Where that leaves us. So who got the beginning of humanity right? Science got the process right. The evidence for evolution and an ancient Earth is overwhelming. Pretending it isn't won't make it go away. Scripture, when read for its intent, got the point right. Humans are different. We long for restoration. And we didn't put ourselves here. Can those both be true? Yes, if you're willing to let Genesis speak as ancient literature and let science speak as modern investigation. They answer different questions. The conflict happens when you force Genesis to be a science textbook, or when you force science to be a worldview. The irony? Both stories say you're not here by accident. Genesis says you're crafted. Science says you're the product of 4 billion years of unbroken survival, in a universe fine-tuned to allow atoms, then molecules, then cells, then you. The odds of that are so low that some physicists call it terrifying. So maybe the real question isn't science versus scripture. Maybe it's this: what are you going to do with the fact that you're here? Because whether you came from dust by divine breath, or from stardust by cosmic evolution, you woke up in a world of color and music and grief and joy. And the beginning of humanity isn't just something that happened once. It happens every time a human chooses to act like we're more than molecules. And that choice is yours.